For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. Giza, Egypt. Undoubtedly the most visited place in Egypt, and probably the most written about as well. Videos about it are all over YouTube. Not all of them are reliable, but still, there are a lot. If you want to visit this amazing place, this guide is designed to help you make things go more smoothly, and to understand Giza better. But it also will appeal to those who just want to learn more about the site. What more can be said about it that hasn't already been said? You may be surprised. You're not going to find anything in here about power plants or Atlanteans or aliens, but we will give you the straight dope and a lot of historical context from people who actually study all of the evidence to help you sift out the fact from the fiction. Maybe you will find out some things you didn't know before. Welcome to the Antiquities Travel Guide, a helping hand for visiting historic places. Follow us to different countries as we search for ancient artifacts. If you too wish to explore the ancient past through travel, we'll help you plan where to go, what to see, and how best to enjoy what you encounter. In this series of the ATG, you can accompany Natalie and me on our trek through Egypt, homeland of the ancient Egyptians, Kushites, Libyans, Asiatics, and Greeks. Come on, let's go. There are many places to lodge near the pyramids, from sumptuous to shoddy. We stayed at the Giza Pyramid's guest house, which is low cost but quaint and clean, and within walking distance of the pyramids. I mean, it wasn't a short walk, probably about a half hour, so if you stay there you might want to take a tuk-tuk. But for those who don't mind a morning stroll, feel free to hoof it. We stopped at a juice shop to get some vitamin C. This turned out to be one of Natalie's favorite places. We're walking to Giza from the place we're staying and stopping off to get something to drink. For those of you who are new here, Natalie is a historian of antiquity like me. That fellow walking with us is our local guide Ehab from Young Tut Tours. You might wonder why Natalie and I would need a guide. Don't we know it all already? No, Ehab knows things that we don't. In addition to being studied in Egyptology, he knows the lay of the land. He speaks the language, he has connections, he can get us into places. Definitely worth having. I highly recommend him if you visit here. There are some dodgy guides who will take people through Giza and make up all kinds of stories about ancient power tools, levitation, and other fanciful ideas to wow their audience. But Ehab's not like that. He will be straight with you. We picked up some breakfast at a place on the street called El Ghazawi. The food was amazing. 2 thumbs up.
كل واحد في شنطة ولا عادي؟ لا عادي.
Look at these pomegranates.
One pellet.
So this is what David's eating. David's got his
Beans for breakfast.
and I've got my pomegranates.
Get to Giza early, because it will take you all day to see everything, and there's a lot of walking.
We're here at the Giza necropolis. Right behind me you can see the Sphinx, and over here is the Great Pyramid. This is probably the most iconic necropolis, or the City of the Dead, in all of Egypt. It's so exciting. It's a lot bigger than I sort of imagined. So the entrance price is 240 Egyptian pounds. We actually paid $780 per person, and that's so you can get into all of the different sites. It works out to about $31.50 US.
There will be continual efforts by conveyors, guides, and vendors to get your business. It can be overwhelming if you're not used to it. The best thing to do is to say a firm no thank you and keep walking with no more engagement. Ehab was good at fending people off for us. One can stand in awe and wonder beneath the pyramids of Giza and appreciate the great work that was accomplished here, without dreaming of lost high technology. The reality actually is more fascinating than the science fiction. There's nothing wrong with imagination and coming up with new and innovative ideas, as long as we consider all of the evidence available to us and bring our ideas into harmony with that evidence. This is not to say there are no mysteries. Oh, there are plenty. Although we have a great deal of information at hand, there is even more that we do not know. So unanswered questions abound. And when we don't know something, I will tell you. So what do we know? The necropolis of Giza is the work of the government of the 4th dynasty of Egypt. The 4th dynasty was in power from around the 27th to the 25th century BCE, give or take a century. There were 6, possibly 7 rulers of this dynasty, 3 of which built their afterlife complexes here. Khnum-Kuf, Khufu for short, Khafra, and Menkaura, or as they were known to the Greeks, Cheops, Khephren, and Mycerinus. The plateau is highly organized. The Egyptians divided it with stone and clay walls into 3 huge rectangular precincts, one for each of these 3 kings. Let's take a look at the first one. The Khufu complex consisted of the pyramid, mortuary temple, sometimes called a funerary or upper temple, boat pits, 3 queens pyramids, a satellite pyramid, causeway, valley temple, or lower temple, and 2 cemeteries. They are in varied states of preservation. The mortuary temple of Khufu sat immediately beside his pyramid.
This basalt floor was the floor of the temple, the upper temple of Khufu, here at the Great Pyramid. And above it there would have been a roofed colonnade. Basalt floors were relatively rare. You will find them in some of the Old Kingdom temples, like at Abu Sir, there are a number. The one of Niuserre at Abu Sir is pretty well preserved, but this is also one of the very well preserved ones. This basalt here probably comes from the quarry at Ouidan al-Faras, which is near the Fayoum. It's about 58 kilometers from here, which is quite a distance. Not as much as like an Aswan granite stone, but you might wonder, like, why go through the trouble of bringing basalt like this all the way here to Giza? One of the theories is that this temple represented the cosmos, and the floor was supposed to represent the dark earth and that the soil, and that's why they wanted to use this color stone. And then it is hypothesized that the roof had stars on the top of it, like we saw in the tombs yesterday. And that represented the whole universe. And that would indicate that this temple was created to conduct rites that would help the king ascend into the heavens. But there were certain practical benefits to basalt too, which could have had something to do with it. The homogeneity of the stone, it doesn't have a lot of fissures and cracks. It is relatively easy to quarry. It's resistant to wear. These are all reasons that they could have wanted to use the basalt. Go for it. One of the stones that you'll sometimes get shown by the channels that are all about ancient aliens or Atlantis or something like that is they'll show you these saw cuts. Isn't this interesting? This is a mistake, right? But what does it show? It shows that these basalt blocks were cut with a saw. It wasn't a power saw. You know what came before power saws, everybody? Hand saws, okay? Not power saws. And the Egyptians used to cut these stones. The actual cutting wasn't done by the tool itself, but by the sand and some water that they would place in it. So you'd have the friction of the saw on the sand, right, with the water that would be cutting the stone. They didn't do it all the time this way because you can do it with chisels and carving and all that. But some of these basalt blocks, or actually probably this entire basalt pavement stone floor, the blocks were cut with a saw, and this is one of the mistakes, right? And they would pull back and forth, two men, all right? They would have been cutting another stone, and then they went a little too far. This is probably what stone was underneath it, and they cut this a little bit too. They must have, the block on top, they must have moved a little, and then they were cutting, and then, yeah.
The word the ancient Egyptians used for a pyramid was mer. The derivation of the word is not known for certain. Our word, pyramid, comes from the Greek pyramis, meaning wheaten cake. Yeah, it was noted how the structure was shaped like one of their cakes. The Egyptians, too, had a conical bread loaf called benben, and they used that term for the capstone of a pyramid or the tip of an obelisk, which represented a mound in their mythology that was believed to have arisen from the primordial waters at the beginning of creation. If the pyramid itself represents the sacred benben, this is an indication that the pyramids were connected in some way with the worship of Atum, the sun god who brought forth the benben in the myth. Khufu's father, Sneferu, was the first to build a true pyramid. But Khufu's pyramid surpassed his father's work in both size and accuracy. The height of the Great Pyramid has been calculated to be 146.59 meters, 481 feet. Its base length is 230.33 meters, 756 feet, but it is not a perfect square. Measurements indicate the west side is longer than the east by about 7.4 centimeters, 2.9 inches. Still, even though it is slightly lopsided, the level of accuracy is astonishing. It is not impossibly precise, but it is impressively precise. Why did the royal designers bother being so precise? Their exactitude may have been imbued with symbolic and cultic significance, but no one really knows for sure. Or the reason may have been practical in nature. They may have wanted to avoid the architectural disasters of some of the earlier pyramids and felt such precision would have been a safeguard. The pyramid's orientation is 3 arc minutes, 6 arc seconds off true north. This could have been calculated by stellar alignment. The Egyptians would have used northern or circumpolar stars for orientation, which suggests that the alignment was taken for either the east or west side of the pyramid. But modern measurements have shown that it is the west sides of the Old Kingdom pyramids that were the most accurately aligned. The formal symmetry of the pyramid complexes at Giza has inspired many pyramid enthusiasts to look for more alignments in the hopes of finding hidden meanings or a reason to doubt that the Egyptians built the pyramids. But it is a little too easy to convince ourselves that interesting mathematical correlations were intentional, when often they are coincidental.
The Great Pyramid of Giza was made of 3 different types of limestone. The first kind is called wax stone, and this is what you see here. It was used for the core of the pyramid. The vast majority of the pyramid is made out of wax stone, and that's the limestone that's taken right here from the Giza Plateau. It was quarried here and used here. It didn't have to come very far. But for the middle part of the pyramid, which no one was going to see, accuracy did not matter. As you can see, the stones are all different shapes and sizes. They're placed there somewhat haphazardly. They fill some of the cracks with mortar, but only occasionally where needed. But it didn't matter because no one's going to see this part of the pyramid. You see up there, there's some mortar between some of the stones. Now, of course, in modern times, they probably threw in some to hold things together. But there was, and there is, ancient mortar here as well. And the mortar, they just threw in it where they thought it would do some good. But there is organic material in the mortar. And because there's organic material in the mortar, we can carbon date the pyramid because we know when the mortar was put in. Isn't that cool?
The limestone blocks of the core vary in size, the bigger ones on the bottom weighing as much as 15 tons, while the smaller ones at the top are rather light. The average weight of all of them is about 2.5 tons.
What you see here, the lighter colored limestone on the sides here, just here at the bottom in the middle, this is the second type of limestone used in the pyramid. It's a lighter limestone. You see how it's a little bit lighter than the limestone you see above it? And this area, where you have the lighter limestone, you will see that the stones are more precisely placed, they're more accurately placed, and they're straight, and they use mortar homogeneously. And what you'll notice about this limestone, it's in the center of all the sides. And the number of the stones decreases. It goes kind of like a little pyramid up the side of the whole pyramid. And this is grain stone.
The pyramid was originally composed of 214 courses of stone blocks and a pyramidion on top. But only 205 courses remain today. The courses range in height from about 56 inches at the bottom to 20 inches at the top.
And this is the third type of limestone that was used on the pyramid. This beautiful stone used here for the exterior, the outside, and it was placed very accurately and exquisitely. This comes from Tura Quarry, not too far away, but they would have brought this, it's called mudstone. They would have used this for the exterior, sometimes called white limestone, and it would have gone all the way up and looked very beautiful. Now, when Herodotus was here in the 5th century BCE, he said that the casing stones were still on the pyramid, but now they're all gone. And we think it was around, remember, the 800s of our Common Era forward that people started taking the casing stones off and using it to build other things.
We have a record of the white limestone being brought to this place from Tura Quarry, which was about 13 to 17 kilometers away. An ancient papyrus document called the Logbook of Merer recounts, briefly, the day-by-day work activities of an official named Merer, who led a crew of about 200 men in moving goods from one place to another. Merer names his immediate supervisor as a man named Ankhaf, who we know was the half-brother of Khufu. Let me give you a taste of part of it so you know what it's like. Day 25, Inspector Merer spends the day with his file, his group of men, hauling stones in Tura South, spends the night at Tura South. Day 26, Inspector Merer cast off with his file from Tura South, loaded with stone for Akhet Khufu, the name of Khufu's pyramid. Spends the night at She Khufu, the pool of Khufu, apparently referring to an artificial lake made for the project. Day 27, sets sail from She Khufu, sails towards Akhet Khufu, loaded with stone, spends the night at Akhet Khufu. Day 28, cast off from Akhet Khufu in the morning, sails upriver to Tura South. And it just continues recounting how he and his men go back and forth. Not a particularly interesting read, but it is interesting for the light it sheds on how stone was brought here. Keep in mind that surviving papyri from this period are extremely rare, so this is ancient history gold right here. Years in the sun caused thermal expansion, whereby the stones, having nowhere else to go, were pushed slightly outward, and this would have caused the casing to fail and many of the stones to fall off. So looters did not actually need to take all the stones off the pyramid's sides, but they collected most of them from the bottom, and even the ones still on the sides would have been greatly loosened. When you look at the pyramid from a certain angle, and the light hits it right, you can see a noticeable depression running down the middle of each face. The packing blocks were laid in such a way that they sloped slightly inwards towards the center of each course. No other pyramid shares this feature. This has caused some people to conclude that the pyramid has 8 sides, but it doesn't. And we know this because the first course of stones at the bottom of each side are not concave. The pyramid was designed to have 4 sides. There have been many explanations for the concave sides, but the one that makes the most sense to me is that when the Egyptians stretched a mason's line across the side of a pyramid to lay each course of blocks, the line was so long that it wasn't entirely straight. There is a fuller explanation with diagrams about how this happened in an article on the subject, which I will link below the video. When the other two pyramids were built, this error was corrected. A distinctly recognizable feature of the Great Pyramid are the chevron-shaped blocks seen in a hole in the north side, just above the modern entrance. Right behind it is a narrow corridor leading a short way into the pyramid. This corridor, which was probably an access corridor for workers, was found recently, and there are plans to explore it further. It is believed that it once led directly to the Queen's Chamber. The purpose of roof-like blocks over chambers or corridors usually is to offload the weight from above towards the sides, thus making it easier for the chamber or corridor to bear the weight. But it should be noted that only the top chevron is in line with those that form the roof of the corridor. The bottom one is just blocking the entrance. About 25 BCE, the Roman geographer Strabo reported that there was a movable stone that allowed access to the descending passage, the passage we are now entering. It is unlikely that a trap door would have been original to the structure, and the Egyptians would not have wanted anyone inside after it was sealed. So this movable stone was probably added later, after the tomb had already been plundered, so that the pyramid could be visited by tourists, but closed after hours. And yes, in Strabo's time, tourism to Egypt was a thing. If you want to go inside the Great Pyramid, go early in the day. Otherwise, you'll be in this situation. If you're claustrophobic, the busy time of day is not the best. We still had fun, though. Down there, the descending passageway continues to the subterranean chamber, but we will now be going up the ascending passageway. Some have supposed that the subterranean chamber and so-called Queen's Chamber were each in turn intended to hold the king's body, but that they each were abandoned when plans changed. But considering that Old Kingdom pyramids frequently have 3 chambers, it is reasonable to conclude that all 3 were planned from the beginning. The 2 lower rooms would have been designed to cater to a different aspect of the king's spiritual welfare.
Hold on. It's the Queen's Chamber down there. I think it's like the experience.
Sadly, the Queen's Chamber is not open to visit, but this room was likely not for a queen at all. It has the characteristics of a serdab, a room for the Ka statue of the king, to help protect his Ka, his animating spirit, in the afterlife. The subterranean chamber is in a rough and unfinished condition. It has been suggested that it is supposed to represent an underworld cavern, but it may simply be that it was still under construction when the king died, and so they never finished it. Work customarily froze on tomb projects when the owner died. It was important to get the person interred as soon as possible. When you finally get through the cramped ascending passage, the way will suddenly open up into the awe-inspiring Grand Gallery. It will take your breath away.
How are you feeling?
It's a workout. Probably would have been easier to come here in the morning. It's very crowded.
What you are looking at is the building technique called corbelling, which refers to laying courses of stone little by little over an empty space until the 2 sides finally meet each other at the top. In this way, it is easier for the excessive weight of the thousands of stones above the ceiling to be held. Every stone going up the side bears a little of the weight.
Natalie, how are you feeling?
Feeling good. It's a little claustrophobic in here.
It's hot here.
Ehab says the king's chamber is hot in the winter and cool in the summer. The chamber is made of pink granite. The room is simple but impressive, and sound resonates within it. There against the wall is the sarcophagus that was the final resting place for Khufu's body. It sits on the exact central axis of the pyramid. Since the sarcophagus is larger than the doorway into the chamber, this means it was put here first, and then the walls were built around it. Egyptian documents from the New Kingdom record the continual troubles the government was having with pyramids and other tombs being robbed. It seems this one had its contents plundered even before the end of the Old Kingdom. The break that you see on the corner of the sarcophagus was probably made by looters in order to lift off the heavy lid.
Beautiful granite. One of the first granite sarcophagus.
This looks like it's pink granite as well.
Old Kingdom granite sarcophagi are it's kind of in the new industry, so they're very basic in design.
Above the king's chamber, the Egyptians built 5 chambers, sometimes referred to as stress-relieving chambers, but really only the stones at the top, which are cantilevered in the form of a pent roof, distribute the weight and stresses coming from above. Up there is graffiti from many time periods, but most interestingly, graffiti was left there by the crews who had worked on the pyramid. Some of this graffiti could not have been written after the pyramid was finished because the walls on which they are written are now inaccessible. The workers put their names alongside the name of Khnum Kuf, the long form of the king's name. The large granite beams you see on the ceiling of the king's chamber, and which are in the stress-relieving chambers above it too, have been estimated to weigh somewhere between 50 and 80 tons each. There are signs that some of the beams had begun to crack even while the pyramid was still under construction, but after all these centuries, they have held. When Khufu's priests and workers left this chamber for the last time, they sealed it by sliding portcullis slabs down 3 slots in the side wall of the antechamber. Then further down, they knocked out the beams holding up the huge granite blocks in the grand gallery, which slid down the ascending passage and blocked it. To get out, the men probably slipped down the so-called well, or service shaft, at the bottom of the grand gallery. They then would have sealed the entrance to the descending passage with a limestone block, which they hoped was indistinguishable from the rest of the pyramid casing. But someone found it. Yes, the pyramids served as tombs, but that is not all. They were not merely a place where the dead person was left, and every now and then people would come and lay down some flowers. The pyramids were part of a larger temple complex dedicated to the gods Horus and Osiris. The king, you see, was considered to be an incarnation of Horus while alive, and at death he was believed to be transformed into Osiris, the father of Horus, while the new king would then take on the role of Horus. The tomb of the dead king would serve as the focal point of the Horus-Osiris cult, whose services to these deities would continue long after the king's death. The pyramid also was seen as a kind of cosmic engine that enabled the transformations of the spirit of the king. The Egyptian name of this pyramid, Akhet Khufu, means the Akhet or horizon of Khufu. In their religion, the Akhet was the place of the king's glorification after death. It was the place in the sky in which the sun, and therefore the king, was reborn. The names of many of the other pyramids also refer to the transformation of the king after death. Not only that, but the pyramid was believed to regulate the order of the universe, which included the proper annual floodings of the Nile, which were so necessary for existence. We get these ideas from the pyramid texts, which we discussed in the last couple of episodes. The magnificence of the pyramid brought people in, and pyramid complexes were a source of wealth for the reigning administration and for the priests who work there. In other words, resources were not merely spent on the pyramid complex, but they were acquired by the pyramid complex as well. They also provided job opportunities. But even during the building of these complexes, they functioned as economic engines. When the projects began, they drew people into the area. Not only workers, who would reside here while working, but also the people needed to sustain the workers. Butchers and bakers and brewers and craftsmen and textile makers, all the professions you might find in a village. People needed to shop. Livestock and produce would flow into the area, and many of these business people would remain there even after the project was done in order to do business with those who visited the pyramids. These cities of the dead were indeed like little cities. The two cemeteries of mastaba tombs on the eastern and western sides of Khufu's pyramid are organized into streets and avenues, so this shows advanced planning. And we know from hieroglyphic texts that he was building these cemeteries early in his reign. The Western Cemetery for high officials was underway by year 5 of his reign, and the Eastern Cemetery for his nearest relatives and queens had begun by year 12. The purpose of having the tombs of members of the court and royal family around him was to create a community to be with him in the afterlife. This fellow here is Hemiunu, a grandson of King Sneferu and half-nephew of Khufu. His tomb was found in the Western Cemetery next to the Great Pyramid. The tomb was badly damaged, but this realistic statue of Hemiunu survived, mostly intact. Hemiunu's tomb reveals he held many titles, including Vizier of the King and Overseer of the King's construction projects. For this reason, we think that he was the architect that designed the Great Pyramid. However, Hemiunu died in the 19th year of Khufu's reign, so that suggests someone else completed the construction after he passed. But tombs were added to the cemeteries throughout the Old Kingdom. The 5th and 6th dynasty kings were building their pyramid complexes elsewhere, but Giza nevertheless remained active as a center of religious and economic activity. Tombs were constructed for the descendants of persons already buried here, but also for important personnel of the Giza complexes. The tomb we visited next belonged to one of these important officials. The superstructure of the tomb of Kar is almost completely gone. We are looking at the part that was underground, the chapel. A modern construction now surmounts and protects it. Kar was a person of importance during the 6th dynasty, mainly during the reign of Merenra I. Kar is actually his nickname. His birth name was Meri-Ra-Nefer. He held many titles, among them the True Director of the 6 Great Courts, a title usually reserved for the vizier in the 6th dynasty, and Director of the Pyramid Town Akhet Khufu, the Pyramid Town Ur Khafra, that's the name of Khafra's pyramid complex, and the Pyramid Town Netjeri Menkaura, that's the name of Menkaura's pyramid complex. In other words, he oversaw all of Giza.
This is Kar throughout his life. So from a young man, as he develops through his career, right, until he gets to where he is now. You can even see the pyramid design in his skirt, right, to identify his position. He's got the look of a high priest now, and this is his son.
To thrive in the next life, the dead needed their living family members to attend to the funeral services of the tomb. What did they get in return? The living would petition their dead loved one to use their influence in the next world to bless their family and household. They would write their requests on bowls, linen stelae, sometimes jar stands, and put them in the tomb near the false door. They believed the deceased was just beyond the veil of the door.
We're inside the offering room of the tomb of Kar. Here you can see the false door. There's the offering table right here below me. And on this wall, well, first of all, here is Kar depicted right here. And these are all these different offerings that were offered to him. And here are some numbers telling us how many of the individual offerings were given to him.
2 shafts were found for this tomb, one for Kar and one for his wife. Kar's opens into a burial chamber with a stone sarcophagus. When discovered, the lid had been moved and the sarcophagus was empty. The tomb of Idu is attached to the tomb of Kar. It too is missing the superstructure. Idu held a few of the same titles as Kar, but he was not as prestigious. He was, however, an important judge, and he was an inspector of the priests of the Khafra pyramid complex and an agricultural administrator of the pyramid complex of Pepi I at Saqqara.
Look how exquisite these hieroglyphs are. It just shows you the excellent art and craftsmanship of the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom. Look at this. If anyone ever tells you that, oh, the Egyptians, yeah, when they do hieroglyphs on stone, it looks terrible, show them some of this.
Idu is presenting himself also wearing the skirt of presenting the pyramids. And he just, after I die, people pray for me. That's it. Wearing as a bull or cow. Here, a little baby. You can see the baby here. This is a bread, Anubis. There is an obelisk.
I see something, yeah.
Yeah, this is the obelisk. It's laying down.
Oh, yeah, on its side. Sorry, no.
Oh, like a small one.
Yeah, it's limestone obelisk.
Ah, so it would have been standing upright. There's an obelisk in here. It's limestone and it's fallen over, but it would have been standing up at one time. His name is Idu. Idu, I think his name is. I think that's what he said.
As you see, a little bit fat man. Here is a different.
This is the offering room of the son of Kar. Here we can see another false door. Here he is holding out his hands and the offering table is just below. And this is so interesting. All of these are of the same person, but of different stages of his life. So from younger to older.
It is generally believed that Idu is the son of Kar. But each of them has a son who bears the name of the other, so Idu could just as well be the father of Kar.
Style, but you can see that.
Yeah, I mean, that is very intricate work.
Yeah, very beautiful.
It still has some of the shine on it.
Yes, absolutely amazing.
These are the Queen's pyramids. As with the other pyramids, the casing stones are gone. The first pyramid on the north end was for Hetep-Heres I, who we think was the wife of King Sneferu and mother of Khufu. She was interred in an alabaster sarcophagus. Her tomb is sometimes open, but not the day we visited. The middle pyramid might belong to a queen Meritetes, wife of Khufu, and apparently half-sister. The southernmost pyramid could belong to a Queen Hanutzen, though this is a name known only from later times. Since the pyramid shows signs of being constructed in a hurry and doesn't align with Khufu's pyramid that well, some think it was added by King Khafra later, and that she was his mother. The Khafra pyramid complex, known as Ur-Khafra in ancient times, meaning Khafra is great, consisted of the pyramid, mortuary temple, boat pits, a satellite pyramid, causeway, valley temple, the Sphinx Temple, rock-cut tombs to the north, and a central cemetery, but no queen's pyramids. Khafra's wives' tombs are in the Eastern Cemetery and Central Cemetery.
The Pyramid of Khafra. It's always the little brother never gets the attention. It gets overlooked all the time because everyone's looking at the Great Pyramid. Look at this beautiful pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafra.
If you are wondering why I am saying Khafra instead of Khafre, let me explain. His name and the names of many kings contain the name of the sun god, who is variously called Ra or Re. Why is that? My understanding is that the pronunciation Re is from Coptic, which represents later Egyptian pronunciation, and Ra is probably the older pronunciation. So when I am speaking of people in earlier times, for consistency, I will use the pronunciation Ra. Notice how Khafra chose to align his pyramid with Khufu's, and Menkaura decided to align his with the earlier two. This shows a concern over unity of design for 3 generations. But there is an outlier or two. Khufu's successor was Jedefra, his elder son, but he chose to build his pyramid complex at Abu Rawash, a short distance to the north. And there may have been another king in there, perhaps between Khafra and Menkaura, because there is another 4th dynasty pyramid to the south, at Zawiyat el Aryan, though it was never finished. Khafra constructed a much better pyramid than his brother Jedefra, but he also had a lot more time. Jedefra had a short reign. The middle pyramid measures 216 meters, 708 feet, on each side, and was originally 143 meters, 471 feet, high. Khafra's pyramid looks higher than his father's, but that's an illusion. He built it on bedrock about 10 meters, 33 feet, higher than Khufu's. There was a slope to the plateau, so he had to compensate by adding large blocks of masonry under the southeast corner of the pyramid. Khafra's pyramid had the smooth casing stones over a layer of roughly placed stones, which were in turn covered over a layer of more accurately placed and straightly joined blocks. You can see these near the top of the pyramid. The rough fill layer there probably came off all at once in a big avalanche. You can see the damage they caused further down. But this disaster probably saved the casing stones at the top of the pyramid, because no one would have easily been able to get them off safely after that. The discontinuity between the 2 layers might indicate different building styles, or even a hiatus and then resumption of building. Alternatively, the core masonry may simply have been laid in a more regular fashion towards the top in order to allow the builders greater control where it mattered. The capstone, or pyramidion, is the piece that brought the structure to a point at the top. It was like a complete pyramid in miniature, and it would have had the same angle and the same proportions as the main body. The pyramidions probably were the most desired of all pyramid stones. They were no doubt among the first to be looted. But were they gold? The oldest surviving pyramidion is from Snefru's North Pyramid at Dashur, and it is made of limestone and has no writing on it. A surviving piece of a pyramidion from one of the satellite pyramids here also is made from limestone. The same limestone as the casing. So clearly, at least some pyramids simply had limestone pyramidions. Later pyramidions had hieroglyphs and were made of other types of stone, like granodiorite or basalt. And I know one has been found that has remnants of gold gilding, though this is only from a chapel pyramid. Granite obelisks had gilded gold tips, and I think this is why some have surmised that perhaps the Giza pyramids had gold tops. But all these come from long after the time of the 4th dynasty, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions that the pyramids here had gold-gilded capstones or any writing on them. Most of the top of Khafra's pyramid is still intact, and so we can conclude that its pyramidion would have been relatively small and barely visible from the ground. The polished white limestone would have made the entire pyramid shine brilliantly in the sun. What need of a gilded pyramidion, then? So no, I think it unlikely. Is it possible the pyramids here had a black pyramidion, as we see with Middle Kingdom pyramids? That seems more probable to me, as it would have made a nice contrast with the shiny white sides, but we don't know when this practice began. Khafra's pyramid contains 2 descending passages. We entered through the lower one.
This granite block once sealed the tomb, and this would have been right up in here at the very top. It fits perfectly into here, and it would have been held up by wooden beams. And then after they were done with putting the king in and everything, and they left the tomb, they removed the beams, and boom, it would come down and seal it for good.
On the way in, you'll see a subsidiary chamber off the passageway. It's cut out of the bedrock and has a pented roof. The purpose of this chamber is not entirely clear. It may have been a serdab or an offering room.
We're now heading up towards the burial chamber.
Giovanni Belzoni, the Italian explorer, found this chamber in 1818 and proudly wrote his name on the wall, but he was disappointed to find that he had not been the first person in there. The tomb had been completely plundered, and the bones of a bull had been put in the sarcophagus as an offering of some kind. Khafra's granite sarcophagus is partly embedded in the thick paving that once covered more of the floor. A pit cut into the floor of the chamber probably held the canopic chest, and one of the paving slabs would have served as its lid. The burial chamber has a pented roof. We met an archaeologist who was conducting research there.
No, siamo ancora sotto, non ci sono ancora giunti.
Menkaura's pyramid complex was called Netjeri Menkaura. Menkaura is divine. It consisted of the pyramid, Mortuary Temple, 3 Queens pyramids, Causeway, Valley Temple, and rock-cut tombs to the south, but no boat pits or satellite pyramid. The pyramid was 65 meters high, 213 feet, and had a base area of 102.2 by 104.6 meters, 335 by 343 feet. This is considerably smaller than the other 2 pyramids, which has made people wonder why. Some have surmised that they were running out of room on the plateau. Others have said he did not have the wealth that his predecessors had to spend. And yet his complex has a great deal of granite, which was a very costly stone, so perhaps there were other forces at work. A notable change is that while the pyramids started getting smaller, the temples and their endowments got bigger and more complex. It may just be that the king was shifting emphasis. Take a look at the Egyptian hieroglyphic determinative for pyramid. Notice the red band at the base? Some have speculated that pyramids may have been painted like this around the bottom. Others think it is a vestige of the granite casing at the base of some early pyramids. Khafra's had a granite casing around the bottom, and so did Menkaura's. The upper part of the pyramid was finished in traditional Tura limestone. At the bottom, 16 courses of pink granite casing covered the pyramid base. You can still see some handling bosses on many of the undressed blocks.
So we're looking at the granite casing stones of Menkaura's pyramid, and you can see that some of them are finished and some of them are unfinished. But what's cool about it is you get to see the process, right? That here you have unfinished stones. It means that when they cut these stones and place them, the front side they didn't care about yet, right? They'll worry about that afterward. They didn't cut the stone to size and then place it. They cut part of it to size, stuck it in, and then after it was in, they would plan to take off the front. Now they didn't do that in this particular case, maybe because Menkaura died too soon for it to be done. Sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, there's no hieroglyphs on the pyramids. Well, there may not be any in the pyramids, but there are sometimes on the pyramids, and in this particular pyramid there is. Right here on the granite casing stones of the Menkaura pyramid, we have hieroglyphs describing the entrance to the tomb.
The breach in the north side of the pyramid was likely an attempt in 1196 by the Sultan of Egypt, Al-Aziz Uthman, to locate what he believed to be the other end of the upper corridor. Alas, we now know that the upper corridor was never finished, so his effort was in vain. You can get the full story in the video, The Great Breach is the Oldest Pyramid Hoax, on the History for Granite channel. The interior of the pyramid is not open to tourists at present, but one of the interesting things about the burial chamber is that inside of Menkaura's stone sarcophagus was a wooden coffin inscribed with Menkaura's name. But the coffin was made in the style of much later times, and the bones inside of it dated to between the 7th and 9th century CE. In episode 3 of this season, I mentioned that bones of Djoser were found in his pyramid. I was mistaken. Carbon dating of the mummy parts from Djoser's burial vault show them to be much later than the 3rd dynasty. Findings like these show that after the pyramids had been looted, some visitors came and, for probably religious reasons, left human remains in the pyramids. By the way, the beautiful basalt sarcophagus of Menkaura was intricately carved, a significant advancement from those of Khufu and Khafra. But in 1838, the British took it by ship from Egypt to be brought to the British Museum for safekeeping. But the ship encountered a storm and sunk, and the sarcophagus was lost in the depths of the Mediterranean Sea. It's probably still down there somewhere. The Mortuary temple wasn't finished the way Menkaura had planned. The idea was to make the core of limestone and then to encase it with granite. You can see that some of it is done this way. The telltale sign is that they hadn't finished cutting back the limestone to place the granite. But then someone decided to encase everything with mud brick, which was plastered and whitewashed. It is believed Menkaura's successor, Shepseskaf, was responsible for that. Shepseskaf didn't reign long enough to get a pyramid. For a long time, archaeologists thought that mortuary temples were where the king's funeral took place. But the positioning of the temple is extremely impractical for the carrying of the king's body and grave goods to the pyramid burial chamber, and the doorways in the temple are too narrow. So what was the temple for? Well, the fact that it is designed like the king's palace indicates that the temple functions symbolically as a kind of eternal palace for the deceased king. And just as he might receive visitors who brought gifts to him at the palace, so here offerings were brought to him, and daily rituals were carried out by the priests in much the same way as palace staff, bathing, anointing, and dressing the king, except it was done to his images. We headed back towards the Khafra complex to check out his mortuary temple, causeway, valley temple, and of course, the Sphinx. As with the Menkaura mortuary temple, megalithic blocks of limestone, which were quarried near the Sphinx, were used to form the core of the walls in Khafra's temples. The inside of his mortuary temple was almost entirely lined with granite. Remember that this mortuary temple is earlier than Menkaura's. The practice of using huge blocks to form the cores of the walls and then encasing them with finer quality stone was introduced by Khafra. Also introduced by Khafra were the 5 standard features of later mortuary temples: an entrance hall, a broad columned court, 5 niches for statues of the king, 5 storage chambers, and an inner sanctuary with a pair of stelae, a false door, or both. Khafra loved having statues made of himself, because there are many. Menkaura too, but not as much as Khafra. No king would match the number of Khafra's statues until the New Kingdom. More than 52 of them that are life-size or larger have survived, though none from this temple. The causeway leads here to the southern end of the mortuary temple. You can still see much of the original pavement, though the walls and roof are now gone. The mummified body of Khafra in its coffin would have been pulled up this causeway on a sledge by oxen accompanied by priests. The procession to the tomb would have included furnishings for setting up his afterlife residence.
Whatever.
All 3 valley temples would have sat right on a canal linked to the Nile River. These are the remains of a wharf here in front of the Valley Temple of Khafra. Ramps would have led to the doors of the temple. In the classic design, the Valley Temple needed to be near the water, but the pyramid had to be far enough away to avoid being damaged by water, as well as to provide a dramatic approach. The Valley Temple was built of huge limestone core blocks lined with granite, as we have seen in the last 2 mortuary temples. The temple entrances, there were 2 of them, probably were shut with huge single-leaf wooden doors. Here I am pointing to the seams between the granite blocks. They're not exactly straight, as you can see, but they are tight. Some of this is modern restoration work. The sand caught between them gives the impression that the blocks fit together snugly like puzzle pieces.
This is restoring.
Oh, so you're agreeing? Oh,
Yeah, it's
this is original and that's not original?
yeah. This.
What about all this?
If you look at the top, with the open, all this is stuff.
Between the 2 entrances is the vestibule, with walls of granite, once polished to a shine. This temple may be my favorite part of Giza. It's awesome. The floor was paved with white alabaster. Today it is a mixture of the original floor with modern cement. The columns are very basic in design, just rectangular blocks, no frills. The Egyptians will get fancier over time. But they are freestanding, which is a step up from the ones we saw in Djoser's complex at Saqqara. They can't do it yet with segmented columns, but a single stone block, no problem. Statues of Khafra sat in these pits along the walls. There are 23 statue bases, but one is larger than the rest, probably for a bigger statue. Fumigations and libations were probably performed to these statues. We know that somewhere at Giza, the king's body would have undergone ritual purification. But where? A good guess is that it happened in the Valley Temple. The Sphinx, guardian of the Giza necropolis, is the oldest colossal sculpture found in Egypt. The Egyptians would not carve statues of these proportions again until the New Kingdom. But it probably wasn't the first Sphinx. At Abu Rawash, the head of King Jedefra, carved in dark purple quartzite, was found. Near the back of the head, you can see the beginnings of a lion body. It may be older than this one, though even earlier sphinxes could still be found. It shows at the very least that the classic design of a king's head with a lion's body was current in the 4th dynasty. Could the Sphinx be older than the 4th dynasty? Knowledge of the geological history of the area can assist us. It could not have been carved during the Green Sahara period, which lasted from about 12,000 years ago to about 5,500 years ago. The Sphinx is on the Nile floodplain, and during this period, the Nile was higher than it is today. The Sphinx enclosure would have been flooded. That means it could only have been carved during a desert Sahara period, when the area was dry. That leaves us with two choices, either before 12,000 years ago or after 5,500 years ago. But we can eliminate the earlier dry period, for a very important reason. In the wet period that followed, the river would have been powerful enough to clear anything in its path. The Sphinx could not have survived. Since the Sphinx is still standing, then it must have been carved after 5,500 years ago, that is, after 3,500 BCE. And since this area was being quarried during the 4th dynasty, the Sphinx is likely a product of the 4th dynasty. Why is the head in so much better shape than the body? That is because the Sphinx is carved from 3 different types of limestone. The head is from what we call member 3 limestone, and it is harder and more durable. The body is made from member 2 limestone, which is soft and crumbly, and the base is made from member 1 limestone, which is a petrified shoal and coral reef. It is of higher quality than the member 2. But the Egyptians did not choose these limestone components. It is part of the natural landscape. You see, the Giza Plateau has a plate of limestone called the Mokattem Formation, and it has 3 layers, which in this area is on a diagonal. The limestone where the head is was ideal for carving. It also happens to be the limestone that was quarried to construct the Great Pyramid. The limestone at the bottom of the Sphinx also was decent. The limestone you see on the body was far less desirable, but it was used for the core blocks of Khafra's Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple. Archaeologists are divided on whether the masonry around the Sphinx was original to the sculpture or not. I am in the camp that thinks it was original. Geologist Robert Schneiker and I are working on an academic paper about this. I will share the contents with you when we are done, but suffice it to say for now, we think the lower quality limestone of the Sphinx's body had a casing, just as the lower quality limestone of the temples had a casing. Many people have noticed that the Sphinx's head is not in proper proportion to the body. and some have supposed that the Sphinx may originally have had a bigger, non-human head that fit the body properly, but that it got recarved later and now it's too small. My two immediate thoughts about this are, 1, the Sphinx look, with a human head on a lion's body, seems already to have been standard by the time of the Old Kingdom. And 2, if the small head was thought to be good enough at a later time, why couldn't it have been thought to be good enough originally? Anyway, if the head had once been that of a lion or a jackal, as some have suggested, it would have been too heavy on the front, and the neck would not have been able to support it. Robert Schneiker has observed that the Sphinx is crisscrossed with bedrock fractures, and the head was carved from a fracture-free section of limited scope. The facial features were designed to fall on natural bedding planes within the limestone. The fractures prevented the sculptors from making it any larger. So it is more accurate to say that the body is too big for the head than that the head is too small for the body. Therefore, an explanation is needed for the size of the body. Huge fissures can be seen in the members 1 and 2 limestone layers. A big one runs right across the thinnest part of the Sphinx's body. When the Egyptians discovered this, they realized they couldn't finish off the rear of the Sphinx as planned, so they elongated the body to compensate for it. On the positive side, this allowed them to carve the lower sections of the rear paws out of the higher quality member 1 limestone. When they covered the body with masonry, they filled and covered the fissure as well. The Sphinx Temple lies just east of the Sphinx, and it was never completed. It has the limestone core, but the granite casing was never added. It lies neatly in line with the Valley Temple and shares the same style of limestone masonry. And considering that the Sphinx enclosure was cut to accommodate Khafra's Causeway, these are reasons to believe that all 3 were constructed at the same time. In other words, in the reign of Khafra. The cult of the Sphinx was reactivated in the 18th dynasty, and this area became a kind of national park. The Sphinx Temple wasn't open at this time either, as Amenhotep II built a temple on the terrace northeast of the Sphinx, dedicated to the Sphinx as Horamakhet, a form of the god Horus representing the morning sun. Thutmose IV restored the Sphinx. In the first year of their reigns, the pharaohs of the period came to the chapel between the forepaws to give offerings to the Sphinx and to be ordained and confirmed in their positions. If you had fun with us at Giza today, you won't want to miss our next episode, because we will be going to several major museums in town to show you some of the most fascinating artifacts. As you may know, many amazing treasures have been found at Giza and the other archaeological sites in this region. But where do they put them all? They put them in the museums. So that's where we're going. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more.